Welcome to Born to be Barefoot. I'm your host, Stuart Gordon, with my co-host, Katie Tsuyuki.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Born to be Barefoot podcast. This is a podcast about adventure, active, and healthy lifestyles, existing in nature as we're meant to be, and overall great stories from inspiring people like our guest today, Scott Grisewood. But I'm Katie Tsuyuki, two-time Olympian and outdoor enthusiast. I have my co-host here, Stuart. Stuart, give us a little thing about yourself.
Hi, Katie. Yeah, well, I'm not an Olympian snowboarder. I'm a sports therapist here in the UK, treating many people in a way not dissimilar to Scott. I actually have met Scott, and he's a great guy, and we've got lots in common. And I know you two have got a massive connection back in Canada from your days there. So I'm gonna sit back and listen to you two swap stories and share things, and just throw in the occasional comment now and again. So this is going to be good fun.
And we are your hosts for this podcast that is powered by Barefoot Science in-shoe systems. An amazing little thing. And actually, it was my friends at Barefoot Science that introduced me to you, Scott. Scott is I don't know how else to put it, but he is a sports science technologist and a very knowledgeable friend of mine now. Scott, why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
Well, thanks for having me, Katie. Appreciate it. I've been in the bioperformance or human performance game for the last 28 years. And prior to that, I was a paramedic. So all my working career, I've been in healthcare. And I come across the healing arts and sports performance, which really turned me on when I was doing my internship in college. And I've stuck with it since. I mean, I do work with some non-athletes, but certainly my passion is sports performance. And to make a long story short, I've worked at the highest level of competition in over 20 different sports. So I have an attraction to the power sports specifically. Done a lot of work on the World's Strongest Man Tour, and recently in professional arm wrestling, and most recently as the combat athletes, working with SWAT team members, special forces athletes, and quite enjoy that crowd for sure.
That's definitely some offbeat type of athletes that aren't your, like I say, regular mill type of guys. Why don't you talk about, like, how are you helping these guys? What are you using to help these guys get to reach their performance goals?
Well, that's there's a number of things, and it would be an individual on an individual basis as to what they need. But as far as the basic gist of it is, I employ objective measurement technologies to provide a measured outcomes-based practice. So for somebody like a runner, I would be doing some computerized gait assessment with the OptoGait system there, shoe testing, gait analysis, run analysis, and provide intervention. So usually people are coming to me with something that's pre-existing from an injury standpoint or a restricted mobility standpoint, those types of things. And I will do measurements of all different types and apply the intervention, and then go back and recheck. And it's a system that is data directed, if you will. Yeah, like I said, depending on what kind of conditions, I've got a number of different devices that measure different things.
I've worked personally with you on a couple of these systems. Like you said, one of them is the OptoGait. And I think that's a pretty cool one because for those of you guys who don't know, this is a system that will test your gait. So what do? We walk on a treadmill for about 2 minutes, Scott?
Yeah, our baseline, I do 1 minute tests. And,
1 minute test?
Yeah, 1 minute tests. And you're walking through 97 beams of light. These are two little horizontal bars that will attach to the treadmill. they capture the full movement cycle and they break it down into step length, stance, swing, single support, load response, pre-swing, things like that, step time. So we look at those numbers, and like you mentioned in your case, we found that your load response was in a cautionary zone. So you were, if I remember correctly, around 8 to 10%. And our ideal zone, especially for an athlete, would be 3 and under. So we're not meant to be 100% symmetrical, but we don't want to be any more than 5% asymmetrical as far as the general public. Athletes, I like to have them dialed in a little bit tighter to 3% and under. And in your case, you were, like I say, you were in a cautionary zone up close to 10%. And so
Can I just ask a question, or not ask a question, but just for the benefit of people who don't understand maybe where this gait assessment and the discussion about symmetry and asymmetry, what you're talking about when you say asymmetry, it's the difference between the left side or the left leg, left foot, and the right leg, right foot, yep, in all these different phases of a normal sort of movement cycle, Scott. That's just for clarity, I'd learned about OptoGait initially from Scott. He came over to the UK and showed some methods of using it, which blew my brain away. Oh, this is fantastic. So I've subsequently got involved. But it's quite interesting is that we kind of get blasé about some of the terminology. So when we say asymmetry, we talk about left side, right. So there's no point comparing one athlete to another athlete or to 500 other athletes.
No, this
is the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I compare the athlete against themselves, right? And it's different. Like this equipment is research quality equipment. It is used in research studies and so forth. But in our case, when a practitioner gets their hands on this type of stuff, it's a different scenario than a researcher. So a researcher might be, say, for example, testing a certain brand of shoes, and they get as many participants in that, and they look at what shoes have the best performance overall based on however many samples or people they have in the test. Whereas in this situation, I want to understand how the individual is performing, and based on their imbalances, then the data will tell me or show me where the imbalances are, and it's my job to provide an intervention that changes those imbalances, and in this case, tighten up the asymmetry between left and right leg. So when it comes to leg function, I view it as power plant A and power plant B, and they need to be working fairly closely together. And like I said, we're not meant to be 100% symmetrical, but we start running into trouble and injuries once we get up to 8-10%, depending on the person and their background, what injury history they have. But that's when it starts getting into a cautionary zone. And then over 15%, if that person is a runner or is running as part of their training, we'll shut them down until we get that figured out and get them rebalanced out. So the asymmetry ultimately can lead to 1, poor performance, and 2, injury.
Wow. Right. Yeah. So it's basically kind of like getting your tires balanced on your car.
Great.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot different. I mean, when I first started using this, a lot of people would say, it's like, well, what are you doing that for? Or why would I want to pay for that? And I said, well, have you ever gone to have your tires balanced and tell the guy that, oh yeah, don't bother putting it on the balance machine, just put them on the car. Like, and nobody ever says that they do that. I've also asked the tire guys too, how long you been doing this? Oh, and the one fella tells me, about 30 years. And I said, well, what do you need that machine for? Don't you know where to put those little counterweights yourself? And he goes, no, we use technology. We use technology. So in my opinion, the therapists that are not using objective measurement, it's kind of that same scenario where they're guessing, and a little saying among the practitioners that use this type of technology is that if you're not assessing, you're guessing. And there's a whole lot of truth to that.
Yeah. And you said a minute ago that Katie was out. Now, this is at the time when Katie was actually training for the Olympics. So she's a fantastic high-level performer, but she was out by, 8-10% in
load response.
In the danger zone.
So what does load response mean? So in terms of movement, what does load response mean?
Load response and pre-swing are rotational parameters of the movement cycle, of the gait cycle. And we are supposed to have some. I mean, so load response basically is pronation. Pre-swing is supination as you're toeing off. And those are normal parameters. But again, we can't have too much asymmetry between left and right side. So if you have excessive load response, for example, the analogy that I use is it's similar to having your ball joint worn out. There's too much wobble, right? So in this case, there would be too much internal rotation on one leg compared to the other. Right. And in Katie's case, she had come to me with a history of a deep-seated right anterior hip pain, and she had been through a number of the practitioners at the Olympic Training Center down where she was training. And I think if I can quote her, I think she said, and I even went to a witch doctor too to get it figured out. And so she was referred up to me with regards to having some shockwave treatment done, and I said, well, sure, I could absolutely do that, but until I understand the quality of the movement cycle, the shockwave could potentially be ineffective, because if there's excessive load response, especially on her right side, then that could negate the effects of any treatment. And I personally think that that's what happened. Practitioners that work out of Olympic training centers are no slouches, in my opinion. And I think they could have done, excellent work with Katie to address the issue. But what they didn't do is gait testing and shoe testing. And
they had an OptoGait system in their closet.
Yeah, oh, wow. Collecting dust.
Yeah. Oh my goodness!
Also, right. But no one knew how to use it. They only knew how to use the Opto Jump one.
Yeah, so they were using it for jump testing. So with Katie's case, and I always use this as a great case study, because it really exemplifies why I do what I do. And so, it was interesting to find that she had a high load response. And this was her baseline. So a baseline is without shoes. And then we put on the shoes that she was training in. And that load response went from 8-10% to over 45%.
Oh my God.
I was training in the shoes every day.
Yeah. And so she was wearing these all the time. And
I was testing in them, trading in them.
Yeah. So the other thing that the OptoGait measures is efficiency. So her efficiency numbers were way off. They went from, I believe those were in the teens with her Barefoot. And then they went over 100. So her efficiency went completely out the window. And to be honest with you, it was a real mess. But so what we did with that situation is, okay, I got my baseline. I brought her into the treatment room. I did the shockwave treatment and set up another appointment for her to come back and to bring some shoes with her so that we could test other shoes to see if we can get her into a pair of shoes that wasn't throwing the quality off.
I think I brought
the quality of the movement cycle off. She brought me like a dozen pairs. It took all afternoon to get through them, but I think out of those dozen pairs, there was one pair that tightened her right up, and so that addressed the shoe issue. So the problem was that the shoes that she was wearing, they weren't the right shoes for her. They might be the right shoes for somebody else, but they weren't the right shoes for her.
Those shoes, by the way, I went from stiff sole no, pretty much like narrow toe box, all these things to then Scott sent me the parameters of what I need to look for in a shoe. And I think it needed to roll up, wide toe box, zero or low drop. And I just had to be comfortable as well. So he sent me on a shoe hunt with all of this 4 parameters. And I came back with, about half dozen shoes or so, but they were all so different from what I was using before. And it amazes me how people still wear these shoes that are very stiff and narrow toe boxes, and they're trying to do performance things. And obviously, as Scott says with these numbers, it is especially shocking to me because I'm the one that went from not so danger zone in my bare feet and my baseline to, 100% worsening.
But the amazing thing here is that you were performing at the highest level as a snowboarder.
Yeah. As a snowboarder, I mean, my feet they are kind of locked in there and in this very stiff, rigid boot, But your feet still have to move, you have to change the pressure, change the load when you're snowboarding. I'm not an expert snowboard by any stretch, but you're still got to get some contact with the bottom of your feet through those boots onto the snowboard to give you some feedback, haven't you? So but Scott, this is one thing, isn't it, for you? I mean, how is it that somebody can perform at that level yet still have all of those problems? If I was a runner, I'd be effed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
stay on that board.
That's the thing about athletes is some people are much more adaptable than others. And honestly, if you were to look at Usain Bolt, his running mechanics, there's a lot that could be said or changed about those running mechanics. But would you do it? If he's not injuring and he's at that high level, somebody who's been doing it over and over at his age, would you try and change it? Right? Now, if somebody got their hands on Usain when he was 14 or 15 and you worked on changing the movement cycle then, that's a different story. But there are people that, have all kinds of asymmetries. And well, the saying is, the best athletes are the ones that compensate the most.
Yeah.
And, luckily we're getting into an era in time where that doesn't have to be the way going forward, especially when we get our hands on the younger kids as they're growing up. We can get them balanced out going forward. And my hope is that we'll start seeing better and better performances once we start working with the younger crowd and they grow up. Yeah, but just back to Katie's situation for a second there. As far as the intervention goes, we did the shockwave. We got her to come back. We found a pair of shoes for her that worked for her. And then to address her inherent issues with the movement cycle without shoes, she had weak feet. She had, as Dr. Gorman puts it, she was drunk. So she had dramatically reduced utilization of normal kinematics. And so that's where the barefoot science comes in. So that's the other part of the intervention. So we found shoes that worked for her. We put her in barefoot science. We changed the quality of her movement cycle and we monitored it over the months. And so the way that we kind of reaffirm is that, a couple months down the road, we take the shoes away with the barefoot science in them, and we put her back on the treadmill and we do another gait test. So it's right back to our initial parameters for baseline testing. And if there's changes to the positive, then that shows us that, the choice of interventions that we're making are working. And in this case, the barefoot science is really coming to the table to help address the foot strength and proprioception. So what that allows us to do is to focus more on sport-specific training than to have to prescribe Katie, 2 2-3 hours a week at least with foot specific and balance related proprioceptive training in the gym. And that's the beauty of, in my opinion, of using Barefoot Science, is you put it in there and it's like they're training all the time. They're wearing it.
Yeah.
So we don't have to spend the time in the clinic doing so much of the balance work and so forth. In some cases we do, depending on how bad it is, and perhaps prior concussions and things like that. But in Katie's case, we put the Barefoots in, and let's monitor them from, I think she was coming up on every couple of weeks for a period of time. And so we would just monitor it to make sure that the quality of the movement cycle kept improving. So,
and for those of you guys don't know, these Barefoot Science insoles have 7 levels that progressively get more, I don't like intense, but the little pills that kind of go into this insert get firmer and higher with every level that you go up. And I wasn't even at level 7 and was getting kind of not instant results, but was getting results. So I think I was only at 4 or 5 or something like that when I started working with Scott. So, some people might look at the product and be like, oh, well, I have to be at level 7, or I start at level 7, but no, level 1, level 2, they're definitely there for a reason, and you still get good results. So yeah, I thought that was cool, because I've been working with the product for a bit, and people are like, I'm just going to jump on level 7. Then they're like, this didn't work for me.
Yeah, that would be a mistake,
I've seen it a lot with high performance athletes, and I can be very specific and say triathletes. I've given it to at least 2 pairs of triathletes that have been like, this isn't for me. And I was like, well, how did you use the product? Or whatever. I just started at level 7. And I was like, yes.
Yeah. Well, you go into a gym and you don't start out at your personal best, right? If you have an injury to your bicep, for example, you might start at, depending on the person, say 10 pounds, and then you slowly progress up. You just don't jump to a 50-pound dumbbell curl. So it's the same sort of concept. You gotta introduce the intervention slowly and build up your strength. If people do that, they're in the category of likely getting foot cramps and so forth, because you're putting a stimulus in there that is causing a lot of action in the nervous system and foot musculature and so forth, and you can do too much too quick. And if any complaints that I've had about Barefoot Science have boiled down to that dome that is not being in the right place, because the insert is not flat in the shoe, or they've got restriction in the mobility of the joints of the foot. So you can get some cramping. So if the foot is very rigid and has lost its intrinsic mobility, you can get some cramping in the feet. So that's why, here in the clinic where we've got, we can do therapy, we can do treatment to address the mobility, whereas somebody at home may not have that access. They may have to get some work done on their feet to loosen it up, but that's on the very rare occasion. And it's something that is not the product itself, it's the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott, you kind of touched light on concussions.
Yeah.
Concussions have, kind of come up in the past with the NFL and the NHL for gridiron football. For my football lovers out there, I'll call it gridiron. And for the NHL, the hockey players out there. And, concussions with these high impact sports, they're such a hot topic. I got a concussion. I was doing a trick, landed in the pipe and some slush, hit my head, got a concussion, took me out for quite a bit. And the great thing about working with Scott was that we had a baseline to go from. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about gait and concussions, or gait and brain injuries?
Okay, so that clearly can be compromised with a concussion. Oftentimes our step length will go out, so our awareness of what's equal left to right side can be compromised, and certainly in balance. And so to be able to read those parameters, I like reading balance on my Zebras force plate. That was actually the first piece of equipment that I got with regards.
What is that?
Sorry?
What is that? Why don't you explain to us what the Zebra force plate is?
Yeah, it's a rectangular, looks like a rectangular piece of metal, I don't know, 2.5 feet wide by 1.5 high.
What's that measuring?
Yeah, and you step on it. So it's attached to the computer, and it provides weight distribution, but it also provides me with measurement in the area used, as far as the area that's consumed when you're swaying, the longest path length, and the velocity of your sway.
So it's kind of like that Wii balance board that they had in the 2000s or whatever.
Yeah, sort of. And so if you have poor balance, the area used is going to be greater. So the higher the number there, so you're swaying in a larger area. Therefore, your path length you're going to be a longer path length, and typically the velocity of the sway, how fast you're falling over, increases. So to have good balance, we want a small area of sway, a small path length, and the velocity of the sway needs to be slow. And so again, this is where Barefoot Science comes in to help with somebody with concussion, is because we can put them in the shoes. And again, I would go through the whole gait process with that person as well. But you're in the drunk state, as Dr. Gorman would say, dramatically reduced utilization of normal kinematics. And by using the Barefoot Science, we can rehabilitate the proprioceptors and foot strength and improve the balance. Now, balance could also have vestibular component to it, but it's also with the feet and the proprioceptors as well. So,
can I just, Scott? I'm gonna be a Dumbo here. Vestibular. I know we're talking about, when we talk about balance, there are three things that control balance. Yeah, we've got our eyes when we focus on something ahead of us. We've got a bit of our inner ear, and that's the vestibular. Yeah.
Yes.
And then the proprioceptors is what is a sensory nerve system.
There's sensors in ligaments, tendons, and musculature that tell us our position in space, basically.
Right. Okay.
And so
those three things are helping us balance. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about standard, with concussions, and they'll measure balance, and it's easy to make the assumption that it's the vestibular that's the issue if you're poor with balance. But I've got a number of before and after tests with people who are not concussed that have a rigid foot. So when I mobilize the foot, I don't get a lot of movement. And when you have a rigid foot and you do a one leg balance test, your balance is not great. When I release that foot, and in my case, I use a shockwave device to release it. So they're big sound waves that are big enough to release joints in the feet. I do the release with the foot, and then we get them to rebalance. And in every case that I've done, we've had a significant improvement in balance. So one could be sort of misled that balance, the vestibular is the main issue. But if they don't look at the feet and understand what's going on down there, the poor balance could be coming from the feet, not the vestibular.
Mm. Yeah. Well, one of the descriptions I use is that every step we take, walking, and even more so running, is a one-legged balancing act.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Just with walking, you have the stance phase where you are on both feet at one time, but not with running. So you're right. I mean, each step is a one-leg balance test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if your balance is out, you're going to have trouble with those. Well, with walking, definitely, but running even more so. Yeah. So how does this
and if you're concussed, then basically the first place, what I've learned that your concussion can visibly be seen would be in your gait or be in your balance. So what I'm kind of getting at is that, so like concerned parents, or maybe, I don't know if the NFL or if the NHL would ever adopt this, because it might take their best players off of the ice or the field when, when they get banged up, right? But a concerned parent or a coach, if you're into it, they can go and get their athletes tested and get a baseline, and then if something trauma happens to the athlete or whatever, they can go back and test against their baseline and actually get a measurement. Like we said, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. So it gives a real measurement of how far off they were from their baseline. So like in my past, and I've talked to a few parents, and it hasn't really changed very much, especially in the lower leagues. Right now, concussion testing is much more like, I'm going to say 5 numbers and you need to repeat them to me in order, or, that sort of much more cognitive based, where I've had athletes tell me in the past that it's like, oh, well, I just act really dumb on my baseline testing so that when I do get concussed, I can still pass the test. I mean, that's athletes thinking, right? Like,
yeah.
I know so many people who do that, but if you're a parent or something like that, and you want to be able to get a solid understanding of the injury to your child or loved one or whatever, then you can reach out to another sports scientist or something like that, like Scott, and do this baseline testing so that you can go back and actually get a grasp on if your kid or your athlete is ready to return to play. Because I know that in sports, this return to play thing is very important, and that's where I'm saying where the athletes will go and they'll fudge their testing so that they can return to play. But really, in reality, they are not ready.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Like, again, your case is what is always a great example of what I use all the time as a case study. So, you came to me in your case with some injury and pain and so forth. But once we got through that, it then came about, making you the best athlete as you could be, and all the testing, with the gait and the balance. And then we haven't even talked about the cognitive testing with the Witty system yet, but all those testings, and we do it on a regular basis, provides more samples and more samples and more samples. So like they say, sample size matters, right? So the more testing that we've done with somebody, if they were to be concussed, whether it's in their sport or a slip and fall on the ice or a motor vehicle accident, it doesn't matter, we can then bring them back and test all those parameters again. And with you in particular, we got you. In regards to brain speed, I forget the exact numbers at the moment. I don't have them in front of me, but we got you down to at least 126 milliseconds of brain speed. And when you were concussed, you came back. You were operating at more than twice that level as slow. So, as a matter of your protocol, when you came back, you had to go see the Canadian concussion doctor, and my understanding is they didn't do any objective testing. They asked you to remember things and follow my finger and the standard test for concussion. Yeah. So when we brought you back, we definitely saw a marked departure from your norm, and because we had a number of samples, we could get a picture of what your norm was as far as, in this case, brain speed. You were operating between, let's say, 89 and 178 milliseconds. And when you come back, you're 708. That's a big difference. And so...
And just let me say this to our listeners, like, I got injured. I was in California. I was needed to be there for another 2 weeks. So I had basically two weeks off to kind of regain, came back to Scott, and I actually felt like pretty fine, pretty okay. I mean, aside from my body being messed up, like I couldn't feel the kind of the concussion, so to speak. Couldn't feel the concussion, but when I hopped on the Witty system and the OptoGait, it was definitely there. So, just because I felt fine didn't mean that my brain was responding in the same way as when I was at no athletes at 100%, let's say 95%.
Yeah. And again, that's why objective measurement, I mean, we can't guess at what brain speed is or the quality of the movement cycle without measuring it. And just the same, another instance, and it was with you. So you've been a really good case study for learning for sure. Is the one time you came in and you said you felt some restriction in that hip, and we did the shockwave on it and some release work and so forth. And you got off the table and you started doing some hip mobility, and you told me you felt great. Didn't feel any restriction, didn't feel any pain. It was awesome. So in a normal situation, the therapist would be, all happy and life would be good. Everything is great. But in this situation, I put you back on the OptoGait system and decided, well, let's look at the quality of the movement. And what happened was that the stimulation of the treatment threw off, it was like a kick in the pants to your nervous system, and it threw off the quality of your movement cycle. So just because you were without pain or restriction doesn't necessarily mean that your function was up to snuff. And so in that case, we had to balance you out in the second screen and rebalance out the movement cycle. So we would never have caught that had we not have had the ability to objectively measure.
Yeah, right. So imagine how many athletes are out there and they go into they're at an event, they go into a treatment tent, go get treatment done from someone who's never had their hands on them or something like that,
Yeah.
And then they're like, I feel awesome.
Yeah.
I got my T-spine adjusted or whatever, and they're like, oh, I feel sweet, I got the click or whatever that people crave to hear or feel or something like that makes me, it must be better.
Yeah. Hey, and in some cases that I've done pre and post, absolutely, the numbers go in the direction that we want, but in some cases they don't. So let's take, for example, an example of a gymnast, and she arrives at the Olympics and she's got some, my ankle feels tight, it doesn't feel right. They go in and they get adjusted and then they go out and they have to perform. So when they actively move the ankle, it feels great. It feels awesome. But how do you know that it didn't throw off the balance? How do you know you didn't, kick the proprioceptors in the pants per se and throw off her balance? And now she's got to go out on the balance beam. Even though she feels good, is she functioning good? That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stuart, have you had any experience in this realm of adjusting?
Yes, I mean, I inspired by when I met Scott, May 2019, and I saw him working somebody on the OptoGait system. I thought this is the way to go. I've been largely working hands-on with people now for 30 years, at that time for 28 years. And I thought, yes, it's great. And this is what I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, is I've been testing people on the OptoGait. And it is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, because that saying, if you're not assessing, you're guessing, has come to the fore. I've fitted orthotics for people for years and years and years, going back 25, 26 years. And you just eyeball it and you'd say, yeah, okay, so now the ankle's lined up with the knee and the knee's lined up with the hip, and off you go, great, you're moving, fantastic. But it's not the case. And this is what I've found since I've measured people on the OptoGait, and they go haywire, absolutely haywire. The stats go mad, and you think, oh, crikey, we need to go back a stage. Now, the stage that you mentioned, Scott, a minute ago was what you call the second screen. And you also mentioned a guy called Dr. Gorman a couple of times. So for our listeners, Dr. Gorman is the guy that devised the use of OptoGait in this functional way, in testing people and finding more than just telling them what's wrong, find a solution. And that's what attracted me to this more than anything, is that it's no good just telling people what's wrong. You've got to provide them with a solution. And that's what he was all about.
Yeah.
He came up with this thing you call the second screen. So do you want to just describe how this second screen is and what it's all about? Because it's absolutely critical, isn't it, in a way as well?
Yeah. So basically, it's a way to do lifetime neuromuscular feedback. And in the case of gait, back to Katie again, in her case, her step length being thrown out after I worked on the hip. We're able to pull up a different screen. They've named it the second screen. And what it consists of is 2 vertical bars, and they represent left and right leg, both different colors. And there's a number above it. And those numbers are highlighted with a green background, a yellow background, or a red background. And if it's a green background, you're somewhere between 0% asymmetrical and 5%, or 5% asymmetrical. And that's our happy zone for the average person. So if your step length is within that 5%, the number will be highlighted in green above these 2 vertical bars. So let's say it's your right leg that has a shorter step length. Then you would reach farther with the right leg, and you can see that vertical bar go up and the number go down. So let's say she was at 5%, reach farther with the right leg, and you can see that the vertical bars start evening out instead of one dipping down. And you use that visual information to feel what it feels like to be symmetrical. So when they get into the green zone, into the or happy zone as I call it, the directive is feel what it feels to walk like that, and use the visual to learn what is equal left to right leg.
And how long does that take to be kind of imprinted? I mean, Katie, you did this obviously quite a lot. So you're seeing it, you're seeing what's going wrong.
You think you know how to walk until you get on this machine. Like you're just it's walking. It's what I've been doing since I was, 1 or whatever. But
yeah. I got mine. I got my OptoGait delivered in lockdown. So I had nobody to test it on except me. And I'd played professional sport. I was a professional soccer player here in the UK and playing lots of other sports at high standard. And I thought, this would be good. I was terrible. I was all over the place.
I know, right?
Yeah. And it took a long time. I mean, the thing, my professional football career was finished by injury. I broke, and I don't know. I mean, this is pure hypothesis, but if I'd have been tested on the OptoGait then, as a kid, going through playing senior football from age 14, 15, men's football, through then into professional, I'd have been, I know for a fact I would have been off the scale like you were.
Oh, yeah.
And I got injuries. I got left groin problems at age 17 that I just could not shake.
I know that the podcast is sponsored by Barefoot Science, but I'll just say this. If you're doing any sort of running sport, like especially running sport, anything, if you have to run ultimate frisbee, whatever, you should be on the system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I became a convert to it 8-9 years ago. I was introduced to it by a company that I'd previously bought orthotics from. And I'd fallen out of love with those, and then saw Barefoot Science. I thought this just made complete sense to me. And then, but I was still guessing. Actually, at that stage, I didn't have this background information of the OptoGait and hadn't met Scott at that point and hadn't got this sort of information. But what fascinates me, Scott, going back to your stuff, you did all this strongman stuff, this world's strongest man stuff. Did you get a chance to do these tests on those sorts of guys?
Yeah, so unfortunately, that was in an era that was before the technology came about. But, just to kind of back up a little bit, I came across Barefoot Science in 1996. And a good friend of mine, Dr. Jim, introduced me to them. And the concept of strengthening as opposed to bracing. And I mean, that made all the sense in the world to me, is that if somebody is healthy enough to respond to stimulus exercise, my first choice would be to go that route as opposed to brace. All right. And back in the, the mid 90s and so forth, people were still wearing weight belts in the gym like the average person. It's not that they don't use them anymore, but it's more for people that are doing 1 rep max type of load or strongman, powerlifters, that kind of thing. But I mean, you used to go to Bally's Fitness, and everybody would have a weight belt on, right? And they used to have, if somebody hurt their neck, they used to put these foam braces around their neck, right? And they don't do that anymore, right? And even at the big box store here, the Home Depot, they used to have these big back braces with suspenders. They made all the staff wear, and they ultimately give that the boot as well. So when you take a muscle's job away, there's no requirement for it to work. So how could we possibly have functional feet if we're bracing them? I mean, it's bad enough that we got to put them in a confined environment called a shoe, but we're not going to stop wearing shoes anytime soon. So the beauty, again, of Barefoot Science is with that dome technology, when you stand on them, it feels like you're standing on a marshmallow in the mid-arch of the foot. And basically that represents walking on a natural surface without shoes. So grass or sand, every step you take, something is going to touch or stimulate your mid-arch. And there's a hotbed of proprioceptors there, a concentration of proprioceptors. And, that came in real handy back in the day when, we were cavemen and it got dark out at nighttime. If it happened to be overcast, any type of ambulation, when you can't see, the information comes from your feet. So it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too slippery, it's too pointy, too rocky. All that information would dictate from the feet, would dictate where and how fast you could ambulate. So it's a primitive sensor system. And by bringing this little insert called Barefoot Science into the shoe, it replicates walking on a natural surface. So that's the beauty of it. Again, lots of beauties of that product.
We talked a bit about powerlifting, and I know that you worked with a bunch of powerlifters. What was your experience with them and putting?
Yeah, so back to Stuart's question about the strongman. I wasn't into technology at the time because it wasn't available. It wasn't until around 2006-07 that computer processors got efficient or fast enough to be able to handle the volumes of data. Like the OptoGait system, we have to use gaming computers, right, with really fast processors to handle all that data. So it wasn't available. But what was available, and one reason why I liked working with the strongman is that everybody was well aware of what their personal best was, right? I've never deadlifted more than X before. I've never log pressed more than X before. And when we provide an intervention, whether it's through treatment or in this case by putting Barefoot Science in, and there's a marked change, that's a pretty good indicator, right? And hey, it may not work for everybody as far as getting those types of strength gains, but again, it goes back to I'm concerned about the individual that I'm working with, right? Not how hundreds or thousands of people respond to a given stimulus. I want to know how my patient responds. And I've seen at a world-class level a deadlift go up 40 pounds just by putting Barefoot Science in. And 40 pounds. So that's the difference between somebody winning a competition or staying in the competition. That is significant. I've seen another instance where we had a guy, they were doing a forward hold. So your arms are straight out in front of you. In this case, this event was sponsored by Schick razors, and they had these razors that were about 3.5 feet high, and they were close to 60 or 70 pounds, whatever. Anyways, they were holding them out straight out in front of them for time. And this one fellow that I was working with, his best time was 7 seconds. And I said, okay, take your shoes off. Let me have a look at your feet. He was very pronated. We threw the Barefoot Science in, and his 7 seconds turned into 21 seconds. Wow. So 300% increase in performance. And that was the determining factor of him going to the Worlds.
I don't think you need an OptoGait or a measurement system to to say that it worked.
So again, I mean, I certainly wish that I had, technology back in those days. but I didn't. But we did have numbers, and like I said, everybody was aware what their numbers in a given discipline were. Then once the technology started coming out, just as I was finishing up with strongman, and then I got into a number of other different sports and started gathering equipment along the way. Like I said, the first device I got was the Zebras force plate that measures balance, and then we got into the surface electromyography, and that reads muscle activity, the quality of the contraction, how many microvolts, peak contractions, things like that. And again, we look at symmetry and quality of contraction with those. And then we moved into the microgait equipment with the gait analysis, the JICO system, the Witty system. What else do we have? I've got heart rate variability monitors, so that we can look at what the state of the autonomic nervous system is. So with regards to, in this example, I'll use the combat athletes or the special forces guys that I work with. We use that to see how much effect stress has on their autonomic nervous system, and we monitor those numbers through their heart rate variability and their high frequency numbers. So again, I try and measure as many parameters of the nervous system as I can to have the biggest picture I can of the athlete. And so with those individuals, they're under a lot of stress. They have to be able to maintain their cognitive function, which means they have to control their stress. So it's fun working with them because we take baselines. So for example, our Witty system that measures brain speed, we'll take a basic test, and we did this a little bit with you guys, but we take it to farther with these type of athletes. So do you remember the other snowboarder that I forget?
Are you going to talk about when Bailey, when we made her do balance tests, and then we put like crying babies and wear headphones with like crying baby? We're like, what's the most stressful, annoying thing that you can think of? And she's like, crying children.
So when we start with the cognitive testing, and so the deal is that your speed of processing will decrease with stress, and with the combat athletes, they have to train to not have that happen to the best of their ability. So what we do is we take a baseline test, and in this case we were doing the Hawkeye test. And once people get down to under 100 milliseconds, which for people who don't understand how fast that is, generally a blink of the eye is anywhere from 180 to 250 milliseconds, depending on how tired you are. So it's a percentage of a blink of an eye when we can test down to 32 milliseconds. So we get them under 100 milliseconds, and then we challenge the brain even more. And in your case, we put you on a Bosu ball upside down, right? So we were balancing and thinking at the same time.
With my snowboard on.
Yes.
I was in my snowboard on an upside down Bosu doing this cognitive testing.
Yes. So when we ask the brain to balance and process information, how much does it slow you down? And then once we adapt to that, okay, we got to balance and process information, and we got that under 100 milliseconds, then we'll challenge them even more. And in your case, we try to replicate the best we can the stressors that you would experience at an event in the lab. So at your event, you have to process information very quickly. You're going down that hill pretty darn fast, and you have to deal with any type of noise in the background, movement in the background. The brain all takes that in and absorbs it. So how much does that slow you down? So in your case, with when we're talking about Bailey there, we took it in a 3-step level. First, in her shoes, doing the cognitive testing, then on the Bosu ball with the snowboard, and then with the earbuds in with the most annoying noise. So we're trying to irritate her now. And how much does it slow her down? So, and part of this exercise is learning focus. Stay focused on what you're doing. And that's imperative in a lot of sports with, athletes. We just get to take that to a much higher level with combat athletes. We could do more, let's just say we do more irritating things.
Do you like punch them in the gut and stuff? You're like karate chop.
We have done stuff like that. We have done stuff like that.
Wow.
We get into food deprivation, sleep deprivation, dousing them with cold water, all these types of things. And they have to be performing these tests at the same time. And the test becomes the training, right? So you do the test and you get your numbers, and you practice the test, practice the test. And we just keep adding more stimulus to the nervous system. And the goal is for the speed of processing to not slow down.
So with these guys in the special forces, are they actually using, or are the forces themselves using this?
No, they're not there yet. I'm working individually with these guys.
Right. Okay. Because I was wondering whether they would use it as a means of testing whether that guy is going to be able to cope with it, or this guy's not going to be able to cope with it. He's in, he's out.
That's where I'm going with this, with my thrust into that community, is that someday that will be the case.
Wow.
But here's the thing, like the brain is highly adaptable. It's plastic. And just because somebody has poor numbers with regards to their, let's say in this case, speed of processing, that doesn't mean anything initially, because that can be trained. And I'm a perfect example of that. I've had 4 good concussions in my life. And the first time I did the cognitive testing, the speed of processing testing, I absolutely, I might as well have fallen flat in my face. I was processing at about 4.5 seconds for me to recognize information.
What?
Yeah, like 4,500 milliseconds. The first time I did double decision, that test we did, car truck. Yeah. So I've since trained myself down to 32 milliseconds. There's not a kid that comes into this office that can beat me. And yes, they're embarrassed because I'm an old guy, and I'm able to process information quicker than them. But it's highly trainable, and I'm a perfect example of that. I just tested last week, and I hadn't done that test, probably in about a year. And I pulled off 32 milliseconds, and I still had 6 tries left over to make that mark. So I only got, I think, two or three wrong on the whole test out of 35 impressions when those lights go off.
I tell you, Scott, there's this is, I just hope against hope that somebody in the rugby world is listening to this podcast. We need to get it out there. We need to get it in front of the rugby people. I've been, without wishing to sort of tempt fate with concussion, I've been bashing my head against a brick wall over here in the UK. Concussion is a massive problem in rugby. And there are currently, I think, 15 or 16 former international rugby players who play for England, Scotland, Ireland, or Wales, who are suing their respective rugby unions for their early onset dementia and problems that they're getting subsequent to concussions. Now, one guy estimated that he'd had 300 concussions during his career, most of them sustained during training. Now, I've tried to contact these people during the training sessions. And, these guys, they've come up with protocols where somebody gets a concussion, they'll say, well, you're out for 2 weeks, or you're out for 4 weeks, or you're out for 6 weeks. But I've said to them, well, how do you know they're okay to come back after 2 weeks or 4 weeks? How do you know then if they're saying we'll keep you out for 6 weeks, how do you know they wouldn't have been all right at 4 weeks? Why don't you test their speed of reaction? Why don't you test their decision-making ability using this simple technology that we have? And here's the crazy thing. They've all got it. They've all got OptoGait, but they, like Katie said right at the beginning of this podcast, they use it as something, or they only know it as something called OptoJump.
Yeah, that was the first version of that device. And you can do walk tests in that, but you have to have like at least a 10-meter system which means, that's a pretty pricey piece of equipment when you're putting in, 3 or 4, meter systems, right?
But it's crazy. They've got it. A lot of these rugby clubs, a lot of the football soccer clubs here in the UK, every Premier League soccer club was sold an OptoJump system, and in some cases the full OptoGait with lineal lengths of it. But they don't use it. They don't use it.
It's crazy. I mean, I don't have an OptoJump. I have the OptoGait system, and with this one we can measure, which would come in handy for concussions too, is auditory reaction time, right? And visual reaction time. Yeah. So real simple. I mean, and you can get real creative with it. I've used that for arm wrestlers.
Right.
So an arm wrestler at the start of the match, it's a ready go. So it's an auditory reaction time. And so one of the cool things about arm wrestling is that, man, biggest lesson in never judging a book by its cover, because you can have the tall, skinny guy and the short, stocky guy in the same weight class, and you think that the stocky guy is going to go right through him. Well, what if the stocky guy has got a history of concussions and his auditory reaction time isn't as good as the skinny guy, right? There's a number of other factors that would determine a win, but that is one of them for sure. Like the stocky guy could be in a losing position before he even knows it, because the other guy heard it first, is what it boils down to. So he's already over in a losing position because the other guy's auditory reaction time was superior to his.
Yeah. Because that's not just about speed of reaction, is it? Because somebody would say, oh, athletes got great speed of reaction, but if they can't hear the trigger or the signal, the gun at the start of 100 meters, whatever it is, then they can't react. However quick their reaction time is, if they don't hear it, process what they're hearing. Oh, that noise means go. They're gone, and we're talking split second stuff, aren't we?
Yeah. So visual reaction time would be huge for, most sports, certainly, the combat athletes, any, contact sports. Yeah. So
kind of hitting a
baseball, I'm sure you went through that when you talked to Dr. Gorman. He's got a nice little example of speed of reaction time with regards to hitting a 95 mile an hour fastball. You'd have to be processing at something like 150 milliseconds, something along that line. But that applies to, let's say, for example, a fighter. The sooner that you see that it's the left jab coming at you or the right roundhouse kick coming at you, the sooner that you can decide what you're going to do with that movement. Right? The combat athletes, the sooner you understand what's going on with the adversary, that could mean the difference between your life or death, right? Like they've done that study with Brain HQ where they did the cognitive training with police. They go through that course and you get a cardboard cutout of the mother and the child that pops out.
Oh yeah, shoot or not shoot.
Yeah, shoot or not shoot study. And it's like, how many of those mothers and babies got knocked off because of the person not being able to process information quickly enough. And that's a situation where it's a testing scenario. The person is likely stressed out to a certain degree, which slows down your speed of thinking, and therefore you're unknowingly knocking off mothers and children when it should be the bad guy. So there's all kinds of application for speed of cognitive processing when it comes to athletic capabilities.
Wow. It's a massive area, isn't it? Huge area. Katie, we're kind of, this is just going on. We can't stop talking, but we're kind of.
We're definitely gonna have to have Scott on again. Like we haven't even shed light on a bunch of things that Scott does and what he's doing to help athletes and performance and stuff. So, but we are unfortunately out of time for this week. But Scott, as I said, we're going to have you back. Are you okay with that, Scott?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Come talk to us.
Yeah, for sure. Good to talk to you guys again, and let's do it again soon.
Yeah. And
thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much, Scott, for taking the time to talk to us. Why don't you tell everyone or anyone who's interested in getting in touch with you or learning more, or getting all sports science-y, how they can get in touch, how they can contact you?
Okay, well, I'm definitely not a social media guy. They'd have to contact me through my email, and that is hptherapy@rogers.com. hptherapy@rogers.com. You guys all got that? Scott is definitely an asset to have in your sporting life, and he's got some amazing things. So we'd also like to thank our sponsors, Barefoot Science insoles. You guys head over to their social media at Barefoot Science to check out some awesome videos. A lot of them have Stuart in it explaining great things, so you can go over and actually see his beautiful face. But yes, head over to barefootscience.com. Check out barefoot-science.com, and you can see all of the products on there. If you want to come chat with us, if you're someone who would be interested in coming on our show, shoot us a DM on our social media. That would be great. We'd love to hear anybody's interesting stories. Come on, talk to Stuart and I. But anyways, I'm Katie Tizuki. I'm here in New Zealand, and it is morning for me. So everyone, hope you all have a good day. Good morning. And Stuart?
It's good night from me. It's now 9:15 in the evening. I'm going to crawl off to my bed and prepare myself for another day of gait assessments and balance tests. All inspired by Scott.
Nice.
Scott?
Nice. Well, I'll say good afternoon. It's
thank you.
Just after 4:00, and I'm going back to work.
Good on you. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Katie.
Oh, thank you guys so much, and have a great week, everyone.
You too. Bye now.
Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Born to Be Barefoot podcast with myself, Katie Tsuki, and the wonderful Stuart Gordon. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star review. We'll see you guys next week.